Pei Jing was my personal bodyguard. But when I was attacked, he instinctively sacrificed himself to protect my younger sister. Later, after failing to seize the throne, I was forced off a cliff to my death by Pei Jing's arrow. When I was given a second chance, my father ordered me to choose a new bodyguard. I let Pei Jing be beaten until he was covered in blood, then turned and chose another. Later, he broke into the princess's chambers at night, kneeling with a trembling voice, begging for punishment. Your Highness, why didn't you choose me? On the eve of Xinxian's ascension to the throne, she came to see me in prison. Her regal elegance stood out starkly against the dimly lit prison. If my elder sister had been wise enough to step aside earlier, she wouldn't have suffered this fate. She looked down at me with pity in her eyes, but it was fake and smug. I glanced at Xinxian's back. In the dim light, the tall figure cast a shadow on the wall, appearing even more towering. I knew who it was. Xinxian. I lowered my eyes, my expression a mix of a smile and a frown. Besides relying on men, what else can you do? My elder sister need not say such things to provoke me. Xinxian glanced at the person behind her, her eyes sparkling with amusement. She waved for the others to leave, then leaned in close, her voice soft enough for only me to hear. My dear older sister, do you know how I obtained your token? Before I could answer, she burst into laughter. It was the man you've cherished for years who delivered it to me personally. Oh, and by the way, you've never tasted his flavor, have you? What a pity. I wasn't surprised. That token had always been given to only one person, Pei Jing. And as my personal bodyguard, he had betrayed me. Seeing that I wasn't angry, Xinxian lost interest, said a few more words, and then left the prison with obvious disgust. That night, my former subordinates took the opportunity to break me out of prison. But they were discovered by Pei Jing, who had remained outside. When they were cornered at the edge of a cliff, it was Pei Jing who fired the final arrow. Your Highness. But as I fell off the cliff, I faintly heard his heart-wrenching scream. Ugh! How disgusting. However, when I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn. Zhener, take a look and see if there's anyone you like. My mother pulled my hand and pointed to a row of young men in front of us, implying something. These will be your personal bodyguards from now on. Don't act like you did in the past, choose carefully. Back to the day I selected my bodyguards. A row of young men dressed in black armor stood before me. Throughout history, every prince and princess would receive a personal bodyguard upon reaching adulthood. And now it was my turn to select mine. My mother feared that my habit of judging people by their appearance would resurface. So she reminded me. I understand, Mother. I snapped back to reality and scanned the young men before me, immediately spotting Pei Jing. He truly possessed an extraordinary appearance, especially after being punished the night before. His pale face made his posture even more upright. In my previous life, I had fallen for Pei Jing at first sight. I treated him exceptionally well afterward, always keeping him by my side without needing him to protect me. In my youth, I was merely attracted to his appearance. But over time, I developed genuine feelings for him. Yet Pei Jing betrayed me. He was my personal guard. Yet when I was attacked, he instinctively sacrificed himself to protect Xinxian. Xinxian? I froze, noticing that although Pei Jing remained expressionless, his peripheral vision kept glancing toward the same spot. I followed his gaze and saw Xinxian standing beside my father. Humph. So he was after Xinxian from the start, and I was the one who came between them. I sneered inwardly, feeling a wave of nausea. Is there someone you like? Noticing my gaze, my father finally looked up and asked meaningfully. But before I could answer, he turned to Xinxian and asked, Xianer, is there anyone you like? Today was clearly the day for me to select my personal guards. At my father's words, even my mother, who was usually calm and composed, couldn't help but change her expression. Today, it was my eldest sister's turn to choose first. Shin'er dares not overstep her bounds. I saw Shinxian glance in Pei Jing's direction, then quickly lower her head and speak softly. Her expression pleased the emperor greatly, who declared that if she saw anyone she liked, she could choose first. My mother's face turned ashen. I silently patted her hand to comfort her, then shifted my gaze past Pei Jing to the last person. Compared to the previous secret guards, this man was clearly much more disheveled. His face was covered in unkempt beard, making his true features unclear. He stood there slouching, not even resembling a secret guard. Yet, those amber eyes were clear and pure, and when he looked at people, they carried a hint of a smile. Could he be a fake secret guard? I muttered to myself, but subconsciously walked toward him. But before I could take a few steps, my sleeve was pulled. It was Pei Jing. He raised his hand almost instinctively, but his expression was unusually blank as he did so. "Your Highness," he called out to me in a low voice, tightening his grip. "How dare you?" Before he could finish, I frowned in disgust and snapped. "Who gave you permission to touch me?" "Your Highness." "The dagger." The last man promptly handed him a dagger. Without waiting for Pei Jing to let go, I raised my hand and severed the sleeve. "Your Highness." Pei Jing suddenly widened his eyes. But before he could do anything, he was severely punished by the leader of the Dark Guard standing nearby. The whip with sharp spikes struck him until he was covered in blood. But Pei Jing didn't utter a sound, stubbornly staring in my direction. This was truly strange. I didn't bother to respond, turning around and walking straight toward the person who had handed me the dagger earlier. Behind me, Shinxian had already begun pleading for Pei Jing. I rolled my eyes and raised my gaze to look at the man. Only upon approaching did I realize that he was truly extremely tall when standing straight. I took a few steps back uncomfortably and asked, "What's your name?" "Wei Ji." I hadn't noticed before, but his voice was clear and pleasant, the kind I liked. But the name sounded familiar. I couldn't remember it at the moment, so I didn't dwell on it. Instead, I pointed at Wei Ji and said to my mother, "Then I'll take him." As soon as I finished speaking, Pei Jing, who was kneeling on the ground, turned as pale as a sheet. I had a dream. Or rather, it was something that happened in my previous life. After failing to seize the throne, I was first imprisoned in the Cold Palace by Shinxian. The Cold Palace was remote, and the people in the palace were accustomed to flattering the powerful and oppressing the weak. Moreover, at that time, they wanted nothing more than to stay away from me. Therefore, my 3 meals a day were delivered by a young eunuch. Sometimes the eunuch would talk to me through the wall. He said his name was Wei Ji. Wei Ji? I suddenly woke up. Outside the palace, it was raining heavily, and thunder was rolling. I didn't bother to put on my shoes and rushed out. Wei Ji. The words I wanted to say were stuck in my throat. I frowned at the person kneeling outside my palace. The heavy rain had soaked his clothes, and blood mixed with rainwater flowed down. Wei Ji stood beside him, holding a sword. When he saw me come out, his eyes lit up, but quickly dimmed again. His voice trembled, almost pleading, "Your Highness, why didn't you choose me?" This scene seemed familiar. Back when the imperial palace was attacked, Shinxian was standing beside me, though she was a princess who had trained in martial arts. She was panicking and clinging to my sleeve, calling me third princess in a weak voice. The imperial palace was heavily guarded, with strict security. Yet somehow, an assassin managed to slip through the guards and stab Shinxian with a dagger. I instinctively tried to pull Shinxian away, but she pulled me back with such force that I froze in place for a moment. This gave the assassin the opportunity to close the distance. Pei Jing, who had been surrounded by several assassins, rushed over to block them. But the assassin was cunning. He raised his sleeve and fired several arrows at me with a hidden crossbow. I didn't notice when Xinxian had let go of my sleeve. She was now being shielded by Pei Jing, who had pulled her behind him. When the arrows struck me, I saw Pei Jing's panicked expression as he tried to come to my aid. Behind me, Xinxian still wore a smug smile that hadn't faded. Afterward, Pei Jing was punished for failing to protect his master and was locked in the Dark Bureau's dungeon for 3 days and 3 nights. When he emerged that night, the storm raged just as fiercely. Pei Jing knelt before my palace once more, the rain pouring down on his untreated wounds, mixing with blood and pooling on the ground. I asked him, "Do you know that Xinxian has her own secret guards protecting her?" The emperor doted on the empress consort. Therefore, among all the princes and princesses, Xinxian was the most favored, and the secret guards by Xinxian's side were once among the most formidable shadow guards by the emperor's side. I saw Pei Jing's body tremble slightly. Even though he was injured, soaked in the rain, and kneeling on the ground, his back remained straight. He stared straight ahead and said only, "It is my fault. Please punish me, Your Highness." Pei Jing. I knelt down and suddenly reached out with my hairpin to tear open the fabric on his body. His pale, muscular body was covered in bloodstains, and a hideous scar across his chest nearly spanned the entire upper half of his body. It ran from the upper left side down to his waist, piercing through his heart. This wasn't the first time I'd seen the scar on Pei Jing's body, but it was the first time I'd reached out to touch it despite his attempts to stop me. "Your Highness." Pei Jing nearly lost his composure, calling out to me. The calm expression on his face gradually gave way to panic. Whether it was the cold night wind or not, the body I touched trembled slightly. "Pei Jing." I smiled at him with a gentle expression, but my voice was unnaturally cold. "This scar may be your lifeline, but it is not permanent. Pei Jing once saved my life. He nearly died that time. If there is a next time, I will take your life with my own hands." I had actually intended to patiently ask Pei Jing if he would choose me or Xinxian if given another chance. But seeing Pei Jing's stubborn refusal to bow his head, I suddenly lost interest. This was the first time I had ever shown my true nature in front of Pei Jing. So he stared at me blankly for a moment before finally murmuring, "Yes. But life is unpredictable. Who could have foreseen that when the next time came, it would be Pei Jing who took my life with his own hands? Ugh. How useless. Your Highness." Pei Jing's trembling voice snapped me back to reality. He tried to say something, but Wei Ji's long sword was already pressed against his neck. The sharp blade sliced through Pei Jing's neck, and blood dripped down the blade. "Breaking into the prince's chambers at night deserves death." Wei Ji's voice was clear and crisp, still carrying that carefree demeanor, but the hand holding the sword was steady. He turned his head to look at me. "Your Highness. Step back. The rain is heavy, don't let it soil your eyes." So I obediently stepped back into the palace. "Wei Ji!" From a distance, I shouted at him. "Why haven't you killed him yet? By rights." The moment Pei Jing entered my palace, he should have been dead. "You've failed in your duty." I spoke with certainty. Wei Ji couldn't help but tremble slightly, causing the wound on Pei Jing's neck to grow deeper. I was startled. "Sorry about that." Wei Ji glanced aside and said casually, "Our young prince is still young. He likes to joke around when he speaks. Don't take it to heart, brother. Even if you become a ghost, don't haunt our young prince." I don't know which word triggered Pei Jing. His eyes were bloodshot, and his chest rose and fell with intense emotion. He shouted, "If I were an assassin, the prince would be in danger right now. Wei Ji, you let me rush in, and now you're acting all innocent in front of the prince. The duty of a secret guard is to eliminate all dangers for their master. But you only cared about teasing me and didn't care about the prince's safety. How dare you talk about protecting the prince? Humph. Speaking so righteously. I almost can't help but clap for this man. Unfortunately, he is a traitor at heart. The figure of the young man kneeling on the ground gradually overlapped with the figure of the man who had shot me with an arrow that day. I narrowed my eyes and looked at him for a moment. Then suddenly laughed. I asked him, "What is your name?" "Pei Jing." "Pei Jing." I smiled and nodded, then slowly let the smile fade from my face. You're just a lowly bodyguard. What right do you have to question who I choose to protect? What's your name? Pei Jing. Pei Jing. Well, from now on, you'll be the one I protect. Pei Jing stared at me in disbelief, the color draining from his face. His gaze was filled with sorrow, piercing through the rain as if it were tangible, landing on me. I still smiled, but this time I spoke to Wei Ji. Aren't you going to act? Do you want me to do it myself? Wei Ji scratched his chin and nodded. However, just as he was about to act, Pei Jing finally collapsed unconscious. I heard him snort, as if deliberately wanting me to hear. And he commented loudly, weaker than a woman. How did you become a secret guard? How are you supposed to protect your master? Then he looked up at me with an unusually sincere and kind expression. Your Highness, why don't we just poke a few holes in him? After all, he was now the secret guard by the 7th princess's side. I thought for a few seconds and found Wei Ji's suggestion quite clever. I even felt tempted to try it myself. But in the end, I didn't succeed, because Xinxian arrived. I watched her being carried in by a group of people, the rain soaking the hem of her expensive crane feather robe. But she didn't seem to care at all. Third princess. Xinxian panted softly. She spread her arms to block Pei Jing, her face betraying her anxiety. Don't hurt him. At that moment, Xinxian had not yet reached the age of maturity. Her face still innocent and naive, appearing utterly inexperienced in the ways of the world. Yet it was this very person who saw through my years of pretense and, as if foreseeing everything, had meticulously planned every move against me. So I turned my head to look at her, smiling faintly. Very well. But be sure to keep an eye on that dog by your side. 7th princess. Don't let him out to bite people in the future. Xinxian bit her lower lip, her face flushing with embarrassment for a moment. I never really took Xinxian seriously. Even when I failed to seize the throne and was imprisoned, while Xinxian sat on the most prestigious position in the world, I still didn't think much of her. But I was truly curious. How did she know about my ambitions? Everyone knows that Princess Xinjin of the Great Feng Dynasty is a promiscuous and tyrannical woman, the most unworthy among all the princes and princesses. Even my own mother believed this. She would often tap my forehead. Both helpless and relieved, at least you have an older brother who is the crown prince to protect you. However, the crown prince who was supposed to protect me died in that infamous witchcraft incident. My father felt guilty, so he indulged my spoiled nature even more. And even my mother, overcome with grief, couldn't bring herself to discipline me. It wasn't until my younger brother was born that my mother finally emerged from her grief. But by then, my reputation was already ruined, and there was no way to salvage it. But it was Xinxian. Only she, with her innocent words, asked my father. 3rd princess and my older brother were born of the same mother. How could their personalities be so different? Moreover, I heard that 3rd princess was often praised by the tutor for her exceptional intelligence in her early years. Father, what has happened to my 3rd elder sister? Then, when everyone was insulting me, she stood up and spoke on my behalf with righteous indignation. You say that my 3rd elder sister is spoiled and capricious. But has she ever done anything particularly heinous? You are all a bunch of gossips, slandering my 3rd elder sister's reputation. How despicable! Thus, Xinxian gained a good reputation. But I became a thorn in my father's side. When he was still the crown prince, my father had an older sister who was superior to him in every way. When people spoke of that princess, they could only sigh, if only she were not a woman. The phrase "if only she were not a woman" became a constant source of torment for my father. Therefore, as soon as he ascended the throne, he immediately issued an edict to bestow a weak and useless prince consort upon the eldest princess. Later, that princess retired to a temple to cultivate her mind and body, which finally allowed my father to rest a little easier. It was indeed laughable. He was intoxicated by the tenderness women brought him. Yet he feared even the slightest display of their abilities. Even if that person was his own daughter. These people believed that women were born to kneel before men. Therefore, when he saw me indulging in pleasure and wasting my days in frivolity, though he would scold me superficially, there was no trace of blame in his tone. What Xinxian did was to reopen the wound in my father's heart. At that time, I did indeed take a greater interest in Xinxian. I wanted to see how far she would go to deal with me. Open and covert struggles between princes and princesses are commonplace. And I did not think it was wrong for Xinxian to focus her attention on me, a useless princess. However, the truth left me deeply disappointed. All Xinxian could do was rely on her innate talent to enchant the men around her. Then she used them to achieve her own goals. It was strange. But every man who saw Xinxian couldn't stop thinking about her. Even Pei Jing was no exception. The secret guards trained by the Dark Bureau are utterly loyal to their masters and have never betrayed them. But Pei Jing is the exception. He became Xinxian's pawn placed by my side, and then dealt me the fatal blow. Later, Xinxian looked at me with a hint of pity and mockery, as if I were a helpless ant. She seemed to have decided that she was the ultimate victor, and I was destined to be the one trampled underfoot. The victor takes all, the loser has no say. But I still looked down on Xinxian. I wanted to fight the sky. This fate. One more time. It was probably those words from that day that struck Xinxian. After that night, I never saw Pei Jing again. Secret guards were not meant to be seen. When Pei Jing was by my side before, it was only because of his pleasing face that he became the only one. Now, the one by my side is Wei Ji. But it's not because of his face. I glanced at Wei Ji's scruffy, unkempt face, which went against my sense of beauty, and couldn't help but look away in pain. What are you doing here? My duty is to protect the young prince's safety. Isn't it? Wei Ji spoke with righteous indignation. I have said before, you are the one I protect. You need not risk your life for me, simply stay by my side. I said the same to Pei Jing earlier. At the time, Pei Jing did not speak, but a trace of shame flickered in his eyes. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew something was off. Wei Ji's expression also grew strange. He paused, pointing at his own face in disbelief. The young prince could actually eat my face? Wei Ji, indeed, did not seem like a proper assassin from the Secret Service. He said this with his usual carefree attitude. So I turned my head and, while he wasn't looking, playfully tugged at his beard, examining it closely. I stared until Wei Ji's smile faded and his body stiffened, then spoke seriously. Your bone structure is good. Shave off your beard, and I'm sure I could eat you too. Wei Ji couldn't say a word. He stood stiffly, his eyes darting around. But I noticed that the earlobe hidden under his hair was red as if it were about to bleed. This made me even more curious about how old Wei Ji really was. In my previous life, when I first met Wei Ji, he was already a eunuch. Though I didn't know why a prince's personal guard had ended up castrated and made a eunuch, I assumed he must have been quite old by then and had suffered a great deal. Thinking of this, I glanced at Wei Ji's lower body and casually asked, "How old are you?" The senses of a secret guard are incredibly sharp. So I looked at this man from head to toe. and the skin exposed to the air turned bright red in an instant. It was truly astonishing. But before I could finish marveling, the man, struggling with embarrassment, asked me earnestly, "Is the monthly salary for being the young prince's concubine higher than that of a personal bodyguard?" I thought carefully and replied, "Of course." We looked at each other, and all that remained was, "Then let's do it." Wei Ji tore off his outer garment and shouted hoarsely, "As long as the young prince rewards me generously, I'll do anything. Not just my body, I'll even dig out my heart for you." Young prince. Only terror remained. I immediately let go of Wei Ji's beard and pointed expressionlessly toward the palace gates. "Get out of here." Wei Ji rolled away with a smile. Before rolling away, he muttered to himself, "Oh, I finally got to see the young prince get angry. A young girl of this age should get angry and throw tantrums more often to be normal." I was startled, vaguely remembering that someone had said something similar to me before. How can Jinjin be so good-tempered? That won't do. Little girls should be able to throw tantrums, even if she's being stubborn and unreasonable. What's there to be afraid of? You have your imperial brother to take care of you. I'm the crown prince. It's my older sister. All right. All right. It's my older sister. But Jinjin, from now on, we can only call each other that when we're alone. Don't let anyone else hear. The image of that cheerful older sister is gradually fading from my memory. She was my older sister, not my royal brother. Few people know this. Even those who do are almost forgotten. Not even her own mother. Not even herself. Yet such a carefree and unrestrained person met her end in a filthy mess. Even worse. There was a disheveled concubine weeping by her body, claiming that the crown prince had made advances toward her while drunk. Advances? It was utterly ridiculous. She was merely a young woman who had been forced to forget her true identity for over a decade due to her mother's ambition. No one came forward to clear her name, and no one dared to do so. If the news that the crown prince was a woman were to spread, it would spark a bloody upheaval. So her own mother set the fire herself and blamed it on a witchcraft conspiracy. That day, the flames were so intense they nearly blinded me. But I forced myself to watch. Watching the fire be extinguished. Watching the ruins lie in ruins. My elder sister lived a life of integrity and had the talent to govern the realm. She should have been a wise ruler. Yet she ended up bearing an unfounded stigma, unable to rest in peace even after death. That day, my mother held me and wept, repeating over and over in my ear, "If only she hadn't been a girl. If only she hadn't been a girl." I stood there, unable to speak. My mother believed she had covered her tracks perfectly. But when my father died in his previous life, he told me with his own lips that he knew my sister's true gender. At that moment, he lay on the dragon bed, half paralyzed. Yet he struggled to raise his body and pointed at me with a trembling hand. Perhaps he mistook me for my elder sister. My father's face twisted into a hideous grimace as he spoke each word slowly. "A woman deserves to die. Because women are not allowed to enter the imperial court. Because women are not allowed to achieve glory. Because women are not allowed to become heirs to the throne. Because women are not allowed to stand above men." I had Wei Ji's words. I hadn't thought about these past events for a long time. Now, because of Wei Ji's words, so many absurd and ridiculous memories have been brought back. So, older sister, you see how harsh the world is to women. But I refuse to believe it. I will, for you and for all the women of the world, clear our names. After that day, rumors began to circulate in the palace that I had taken a liking to my personal bodyguard and even forced myself upon him. Such rumors existed in my previous life as well, though they were not true. I did not pay them much mind. However, when I met Wei Ji's shy and timid gaze, I could not resist the urge to strike him. Because of this incident, my father summoned me to inquire about the matter. Upon hearing that I was indeed interested in the bodyguard, he merely looked complicated and said nothing more. But he clearly looked relieved. Soon after, my mother summoned me to her chambers. She watched me finish the calming soup as usual, then exhaled a breath of stale air before casually asking, "Have you truly set your sights on that man?" "Yes, Mother. I saw that he was strong and must have exceptional abilities," I answered with a smile. You. My mother scolded me playfully, then laughed and said, "All right. Do as you wish. After all, you are a princess, and no one dares to say anything to you. Moreover, you have a prince brother who can protect you. By the way, the Grand Tutor recently praised Xian for his excellent studies." She spoke to me like an ordinary mother, holding my hand and telling me about my royal brother. Ever since Xian was named Crown Prince, my mother seemed to have returned to her former self. She seemed to have forgotten that she had another daughter who had been framed and killed because of her own ambitions. I listened with a smile, then pretended to grow impatient and demanded to go out and play. So my mother scolded me for being unambitious and not as good as my brother, then waved me away. Wei Ji was waiting outside the inner palace. He had a blade of grass in his mouth. His arms crossed over his chest, leaning against the wall. He should have been a cold-blooded, ruthless bodyguard, but he was surprisingly popular, with palace attendants greeting him as they passed by. He even chatted freely with them. "You mean the young princess? Of course she likes me. She likes me so much she wants to see me every day. I'm not good-looking? How shallow! Does the young princess only care about looks?" Even when he saw Xian leading Pei Jing toward the inner palace, Wei Ji raised his voice on purpose. The young prince even specifically instructed that I was the person she was protecting, different from the other secret guards, and that I only needed to accompany her. I saw Pei Jing's eyelashes tremble slightly as he raised his gaze to look at Wei Ji as if he were looking at a dead person. But Pei Jing didn't move. He stood quietly by Xian's side, just as he had always done when he was with me. So I called out to the maid who was about to leave and hid in the shadows. The palace attendants bowed to Xian, but Xian was clearly more interested in Wei Ji. So she took the initiative to ask Wei Ji about me. And at the end, she casually added, "It's a pity that the third princess's affection is always so short-lived." That was someone else. Wei Ji remained his usual cheerful self, showing no change. "The young prince treats me differently." This person spoke loudly, and I heard clearly, wanting only to sneer. "Yes, I treat him differently. If it weren't for the favor of a few meals in my previous life, I would have stripped this future eunuch naked and thrown him out, letting him be humiliated in front of everyone." I rolled my eyes and looked at Pei Jing standing beside me. He stood there with a cold expression, but the veins bulging on the back of his hand, which was pressed against his sword, betrayed his true feelings. I knew that Pei Jing had been reborn. I had thought that he was in love with Xian and that after being reborn, he would tell Xian all the secrets I knew. But after waiting for several days, I saw no sign of Xian, and she even seemed to be losing her composure. Meanwhile, his actions that day were those of someone deeply in love with me yet deeply hurt by me. Ugh! How disgusting! So I stepped forward. "What's the matter? Has the seventh princess taken a liking to this little guard of mine? That won't do." I moved closer and placed my hand on Wei Ji's waist, smiling sweetly. "I haven't had enough fun yet. Besides, I think the one by your side is more handsome. It's just a pity that I only like muscular men these days." I deliberately made a few disapproving sounds, keeping my hand on Wei Ji's waist. Then, when no one was looking, I pinched him hard a few times. Wei Ji's body stiffened, and he closed his mouth, his expression growing even more expressionless. "Third princess. Don't say such things." Xian frowned. "A Jing is only responsible for protecting me." "Yes. Yes. I nodded dismissively. Seventh princess is always so pure and virtuous. I was just speaking out of turn. Upon hearing this, Xinxian's face flashed a hint of surprise. I didn't want to argue with her further, so I tried to lead Wei Ji away. But unexpectedly, Xinxian suddenly bit her lip and called out to me. The emperor has bestowed the shadow guards by his side upon me. I stopped in my tracks, thinking that I already knew about this. Was she planning to flaunt it in front of me? But Xinxian's next words made me raise my eyebrows in surprise. She said, I heard that Wei Ji's abilities are not outstanding among the other shadow guards. The third princess is short-handed. Why don't I send Pei Jing to her instead, so he can protect her? As Xinxian spoke, her tone carried a hint of urgency she hadn't even noticed herself. I had already sensed that Xinxian seemed to possess some sort of precognitive ability. She appeared to know every step of my plan and had prepared for it in advance. But this time around, she seemed to have lost control over me. Uncertain, I decided to observe further. So I feigned surprise. Seventh princess. You're willing to part with him so easily? The safety of the third princess is more important. You know I've never cared about such things. I only want to die under the peony flowers. Even as a ghost. Xinxian seemed to relax. Then she smiled and said, if Prince Pei Jing is truly as handsome as they say, and if the princess likes him. I don't like him. I interrupted Xinxian, still smiling. But every word was laced with coldness. I am a delicate and precious person. I would never touch something someone else has used. I find it disgusting. As I said the last few words, I looked at Pei Jing, my eyes sparkling. Pei Jing froze. His lips turned pale, and his body swayed as if he couldn't support himself. It was well known that I was a woman who loved beauty. Even the palace attendants who served me had to be of some beauty. Therefore, rumors spread that I kept numerous male concubines in the palace. So I decided to play along. As a woman, I kept many men, which was despised by the world. Pei Jing believed it. So when I first brought him into my entourage, the only emotions in his eyes were shame and disgust. At first, I felt a mix of hurt and resentment, even wanting to teach Pei Jing a lesson. But during the first attempt, my men lost control of their strength, and I saw the scar on Pei Jing's chest. So I had to stop. There was nothing I could do. After all, he had saved my life when he was young, and he nearly lost his own life in the process. My elder sister once said that life is far more important than one's reputation. So I decided to endure it for now, thinking that time would reveal his true nature, and perhaps this young bodyguard would come to see me in a different light. But instead of seeing a change, I was met with a curse from Pei Jing. I vaguely remember it was on Pei Jing's birthday. Since it was his first birthday spent by my side, I decided to carve a small wooden sword for him myself, waiting for him to come and tie a red sword tassel on it. I had planned to deliver it personally, but something came up and I was delayed. So I casually asked a palace attendant to deliver it. The palace attendant who delivered it was quite attractive, and perhaps Pei Jing misunderstood. Later, the small wooden sword was returned. The attendant reported that Pei Jing said my status was too low to accept such a gift. However, Shi Luo, who had grown up with me, was furious and shouted. I clearly saw that heartless bastard say the wooden sword was dirty. The item wasn't dirty. He simply despised the one who made it. So I forced myself to think of the scar on Pei Jing's chest. And once again, my life overcame my pride. From that day onward, I never gave Pei Jing any more of the small trinkets I made with my own hands. But I still treated Pei Jing well. During the day, Xinxian failed to send Pei Jing away, though I knew she must have other plans. I never imagined she would go to such ridiculous lengths. A few days later, I saw Pei Jing, who had been specially dressed up and sent to my chambers, and thought to myself, Of course. It's only normal that I look down on Shenxian. A first-rate secret guard from the Dark Guard. Willing to come here to be a bed warmer? I shook my head in disbelief. Keeping my distance, if your leader finds out. He'll think you're a disgrace to his training. Pei Jing had always respected the leader of the Dark Guard. But this time, I was wrong. Pei Jing showed no trace of shame or anger on his face. He merely stared at me with darkened eyes. Then slowly walked toward me. His clothing was thin, and the scar visible through the fabric as he moved nearly marred the beauty of his body. But Pei Jing seemed certain that I would treat him differently after seeing that scar. So I did as he wished. Fixing my gaze on the scar, and the smile on my face gradually faded. I saw Pei Jing sigh in relief. He had almost abandoned all his dignity and pride, kneeling before me and trying to imitate the flattering tactics of the palace servants he had once looked down upon. He said, "Your Highness, I am not dirty." As Pei Jing spoke these words, his voice trembled, yet it carried a faint, almost imperceptible hint of madness. Seeing that I didn't respond, the light in his eyes seemed to grow brighter little by little. "If your Highness needs me, I can also." I used the dagger to cut the loose sash around Pei Jing's waist, cutting off the rest of his words. Thus, the scar was completely exposed before me, leaving nothing hidden. I raised my eyes to meet Pei Jing's gaze and smiled at him, saying, "How ugly." Pei Jing froze, as if unable to believe what he had heard. So I repeated it with a smile. "The scar on your body is truly ugly." As soon as the words left my mouth, the dagger in my hand swiftly pierced Pei Jing's chest, just inches from his heart. That was the exact spot where Pei Jing had been struck by an arrow in his previous life. I gripped the dagger tightly and slowly pushed it in, twisting it in the flesh without a hint of pain. Warm blood flowed onto my hand. I glanced at it and sneered. How dirty. Pei Jing remained expressionless when the dagger pierced him. But upon hearing those two words, his face twisted in pain, his expression bordering on madness. He subconsciously reached out to grab my hand, but stopped abruptly when he heard my next words. I leaned closer to Pei Jing and spoke softly, enunciating each word clearly. "I told you, Pei Jing, if there is a next time, I will take your life with my own hands." Those words alone were enough to extinguish the last glimmer of light in Pei Jing's eyes. He tilted his head slightly and stared at me for a long time before forcing a smile that was anything but genuine. He said, "How nice. Your Highness is back." Earlier, Pei Jing had said that Wei Ji was putting on a show. But I think he's the one who's being hypocritical now. Thinking this, I blurted it out. Perhaps because I had hurt him too much. Pei Jing only gasped for breath a few times before quickly regaining his composure. He bowed his head almost humbly, about to say something, when the doors to my chambers were forcefully kicked open, accompanied by Wei Ji's increasingly furious voice. "Which shameless dog of a servant dares to take advantage of my absence to steal my lover?" I thought to myself. It seems I've been too lenient with Wei Ji lately. This brat has grown increasingly bold. I turned to confront him, but when I raised my eyes, I froze. Wait. Who is this young man with the baby face? However, Pei Jing's reaction was even more extreme. He almost instinctively stood up to block me, shielding my view of Wei Ji. His voice was panicked. "Your Highness, don't look at him." But this man had been punished several times since his rebirth, and now he had been stabbed by me, losing a lot of blood. He stumbled and almost lost his balance. So I heard Wei Ji's usual complaint again. "You're weaker than a woman. How did you become a secret guard?" Wei Ji stormed in, looking determined to catch me in the act. But he slowed down as he approached. When he finally stood in front of me, he looked a bit flustered. But he still stubbornly asked me, "What are you looking at, young prince?" "Looking at your face. You do have a certain charm that could make me want to eat you." I sighed to myself, thinking it was no wonder he usually kept his beard to hide his appearance. I thought that after saying that, Wei Ji would blush like usual and then tease me, saying, "Young prince, you can't judge a person by their appearance." But this time, Wei Ji just gave me a strange look and snorted. I knew it! I was speechless. So I finally pointed at Pei Jing with a wooden expression. My sleeping quarters were attacked. Wei Ji, this is the second time you've failed to protect your master. Do you know your crime? Attacked? Wei Ji continued to sneer. It's probably just a beauty knife, turning you into a playboy ghost. I grew even more convinced